You're listening to the Fish Alaska podcast. This is Melissa Norris, and a then and now look at Cooper Landing with Alaska Wildland Adventures, Kenai Riverside Lodge. Kirk, could you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do for Alaska Wildland?
Sure. My name is Kirk Hessel. I'm the president and CEO of Alaska Wildland Adventures. CEO, by the way, stands for Chief Exploration Officer. I learned early on in my career I wasn't a very good executive, so I like that title, Exploration Officer. And my job is to lead our leaders into all that we do with Alaska Wildland Adventures.
Awesome. What is Exploration Officer? What do you get to do?
Well, I mostly explore things that I'm really good at, and things that I'm not quite so good at, I hand off to people like Dave and other managers that really can do all the details better than I can at this stage. So I like collaborating with all of our leaders to make our business work.
Bill, introduce yourself to everyone, please.
Yeah, Bill Wright, and I'm retired, and I'm living down in Washington State now. But I get up to Alaska every year and have been involved in Alaska since 1972.
Okay, well, we're definitely going to want to hear more about that. And Dave, can you tell everyone who you are, please?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having us today, Melissa. My name is Dave Maternowski. I'm the fishing program manager for Alaska Wildland. So I spend my summers down in Cooper Landing at the Kenai Riverside Lodge. And in the winter months, where I am now is in Girdwood, where I work at the main office for Alaska Wildland, taking reservations for next year, kind of a review of the previous season, and then look forward and plan the next season ahead.
Fun. Well, I want to hear about how that's all going too. So I know our whole purpose today is to chat, kind of get some stories of the days of old and have a nice then and now perspective on Cooper Landing and the fishing, maybe more towards the upper river of the Kenai, kind of a look back and a look at now and comparisons, what's changed and maybe what's better, what's worse, however you like to look at it. So let's start with a little bit of history here. So Kirk and Bill, you got to reach back. You got to dig deep. You got to think about, what people were wearing back in 1975, right? Like, what's your average fisherman attire? Is it the brown vest moment? So take us back to then. What brought you to Alaska? We'll start with Kirk. Maybe what brought you to Alaska, and then how did Alaska Wildland come to be?
Well, yeah, I will do that. And what I'm going to do is set the stage for Bill, who actually started the company back in 1977. But my story is that my first career was environmental education, and I enjoyed working with grade school youth and high school youth. And somewhere along the way, I met a person who just came back from Alaska, had this great job working for Youth Conservation Corps for the Bureau of Land Management north of Fairbanks, doing all these wild things. And I said, I got to get that job. So I applied for it. And the next thing you know, I was 20 years old. And I was a crew leader with a crew of a dozen high school kids from Alaska who knew more about Alaska than I did, but I was their leader. And I loved that job because Youth Conservation Corps was kind of the younger person's version of the civilian conservation corps, back after Depression era. But it was a chance for kids to get out and learn about nature and work on projects, build trails, pick up garbage at campsite, and do a lot of wonderful things like that. And uh, it was also built into the program that they got to learn about the environment. So that was really fun for me. And I did that for 5 years. I worked myself up into the camp director position. And then what happened after 1980 was that President Reagan got elected, and being a fiscal conservative, he cut all these great government jobs, a lot of environmental jobs. And I found myself looking for a new line of work. And my good partner and I, Jim Wells, a good friend, we'd been doing environmental education programs for many, many years. He was a director of the Chugach National Forest down on the Kenai Peninsula in Moose Pass area. I lost my job up with the Bureau of Land Management. So we both came to Alaska in 1981 and spent all our money traveling around to places we hadn't been to, Gates at Yard, Denali, and other places. We realized, we can't afford to do this every year. We're going to have to find a job in Alaska where we get paid to be in the wilderness. And so I had heard that this guy named Bill Wright, who I knew Bill used to be the director of the state park Youth Conservation Corps program. And I had heard that he started a travel program, and I just assumed it was a travel program for kids. So I found out how to get a hold of Bill, and I called him up, and we had a good conversation. And I said, Bill, I want to apply to lead your trips. And he said, well, we don't really do trips for kids. We do trips for adults. But Kirk, I think you really like it because working with adults is different than kids. They're a little bit more along in life. They're a lot more fun. You don't have to pay attention to them all the time. And so Jim and I applied for the job, and Bill hired us. And the next thing you know, we were working for Bill. And Bill took us out for 2 weeks, first 2 weeks of the summer, and he trained us. He took us through the whole trip, and we learned all about how the trip works, all the ins and outs of Bill's philosophy. And to be honest, what we learned those last 2 weeks have been the foundation for everything really we've done ever since. So with this, Bill, let's take you back to your early roots. How you got all started and why you started it.
Well, I started it because of the same thing that you did, because I was chief of the Youth Conservation Corps for the state. And by the way, Ted Stevens was very instrumental in getting the funding for that. I left the job trying to come to a point where I could go and still go out and have fun, but I wasn't getting paid anymore. So I had to come up with these different ways to create revenue. And one of those ways was to do rafting down on the Kenai River. I did that about 1977. The first trips that I was going to do failed miserably to get any clients. And so I was stuck with all these rafts and chuck wagon and all this tents and all this stuff. But I didn't want to give up. So I went to what was then called the Sportsman's Lodge. And that was right on the Kenai River. It's a historic lodge. It actually was in very ill repair. And it was quite that time of Alaska it was very rustic, and a lot of people were we had no regulations on the river. It was just a crazy time, actually, with a lot of characters you can imagine. And right there at the Sportsman's Lodge is right across from the Russian River. So that's where I was able to get the ability to start operating raft trips. And then when a person would ask me if you wanted to go fishing, of course, I'd do that as well. And we started floating. I never forget the first day couldn't get too many people for the raft, and it was a terrible day, and it was raining, and we're going down the Kenai and all the way down through the canyon. And I came back and I thought, oh my God, this isn't going to work. And I was like, it was terrible. But the next day, the sun came out. We saw moose. We saw bears. Everybody was happy. I filled the raft. We made money, and that's where it went from there.
Awesome.
I think one great story that Bill told me, and you could tell better, is that at the time there was no provision for commercial rafting on the river. So Bill went to the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge office and said, well, yeah, explain that, Bill. How did you get your permits?
Well,
you're a permitted person on the river, right?
I'm an old Parks and Rec guy, and of course, I could see the future with the need for regulation, because it was cowboy time on the river. If you can't imagine, the boats that were going up. This is on the upper river, and there was boats going everywhere, but you'd be floating down the river in the middle of the canyon, and a huge jet boat would come up from Skeetlack Lake, and sometimes 2 or 3 at a time, and you'd be rowing to the shore to try to get out of the way. So, I mean, it was a very colorful time. And so, yes, I went down to what was then called the Moose Range, and we've always had an amazing, wonderful time getting along with the Moose Range. Well, now it's Fish and Wildlife. And we went down and we sat down and we said, got to come up with some regulations here so that it's much more safe and equitable for all different types of floating and regular power boating, etc. So that evolved into drift only over a few more years, and then the whole river experience in the upper river became completely different. And whereas I would be floating down the river and I'd come along with all these folks, they'd hold up a stringer of rainbow trout, a lot of beautiful, it went it went to where we were pretty much catch and release, and trying to come up with a more fly fishing. And then the drift boat fishing was it became an amazing new fishery and a beautiful fishery, not only for Alaska but for America, because it is a stunning piece of water.
Well, I have so many questions about everything you just said, but before, Dave, have you heard these stories before?
I've been clued in on a few of these, Melissa, for sure. Spending
Okay.
some evenings with Bill on his trips to Alaska, and from Kirk, and hearing him talk about seeing jet boats in the canyon. There's one guest we have that comes and fishes with me every fall, every year in September. He lives out of state now, but grew up in Anchorage. And his dad actually guided in Western Alaska. So, when he was a pup, his dad would float him down to Kenai in a canoe, and they'd go down the canyon and go moose hunting. And he used to talk about seeing jet boats up and down the upper Kenai, same kind of time frame when Jim's
Nuts.
Landing was like just a high bank that you would dump your boat over. It was all grown in. And so it's really cool to hear some of those old stories and see how far along that river has come. And it's really cool to know that it's a drift only section now. That's a pretty peaceful place.
Okay, so before we get into some of these changes over the years, let's go back still, because I love this. Bill, I need to know, what were the rafts like? What were the boats like? What was the gear like? What was the outfit of these fishermen? How could I tell you were a fisherman by not telling me you were a fisherman back then?
Well, back then, our gear were just flat out rafts, but we designed a transom on the back of our rafts. So when we got down to Ski Lac Lake after going through the canyon, we could start up. It was about a 9.5 horse engine, and it'd take an hour to get to the pullout point. It was always a challenge coming up the Ski Lac Lake road. When you go home after taking the raft trips, we'd spend most of the evening repairing the raft trailer because it was so brutal on the equipment. But the people, as you know, right there is where the ferry goes across to the Russian. So there was always a lot of people there, and there was also boats coming up and down the river, and it was combat fishing at its finest. And it was, but once you got away from that group right there, and started drifting and down into, everything changed. It became a whole different type of fishery, and of course, with us, with the rest, what we would do is we'd of course throw out a line, but not that great success. And then we'd pull on a bar and let the guys and gals out, and they would be able to fish effectively from different sandbars and gravel bars as we're going down the river.
Okay, yeah. We're going to talk more about the fishing back then, but big picture stuff, back to the big picture. So 1977, your first raft trip, day 2, you were convinced this was a smart plan.
Oh, yeah. But what a choice that I had to giving up my job. I invested my entire life savings in those rafts and such. We had no choice. Had to make it work.
Well, I would venture to guess that every single person I could possibly think to invite on this podcast would have the same why, and that is so we could have fun and still make money while we're having fun. So
Yeah.
You had the right idea. What was the next step? So you hired Kirk. and his buddy, and he started
Yeah,
running tours for you.
well,
But how did you grow?
we grew that it, the second year, actually, people started coming on our longer trips. And then, so the beginning of those trips were started down on the Kenai. And of course, we were doing day raft trips after that. So that was the second year. And it actually started to materialize that it was going to be a fun, successful venture. And going, we would start the trips on the Kenai River, then go all the way up to the Denali. Well, it was McKinley then, and we were allowed back then to go into McKinley. So we had certain people that were doing those trips, and then certain guides and people and going down and staying down on the river in Cooper Landing. The Cooper Landing folks, just so you know, I don't think they were very well. I know they weren't very thrilled with us at first. They thought we were river hippies, and they thought we were going to get ourselves killed in the canyon. And
Oh
we
boy.
we it took a year or two, but we started. We saved some people on the river. We helped put out forest fires. Of course, we utilized all the stores and brought more people into their bars and into their stores. And so all of a sudden we, became an important part of the community in the first, probably second, third year. And all of a sudden it's a wonderful, harmonious group of people instead of this, those guys, they're crazy, they're going to kill themselves down there. We became part of the community. And we have been. I mean, amazing now. I mean, you see us down there, and the whole idea of community and is so important to our operation, and our young people now, they fit right in. Of course, everybody's young to me now.
I think one of Bill's visionary moments was putting this camping trip together, because back then in 1977 and into 1982, when I started leading those trips, you would either go on a tour, right, where you'd see Alaska out of a bus window or a cruise ship or
Okay.
something, or you'd have to hire a wilderness guide to take you on a, outfitter guide take you into wilderness. And Bill came up with this in-between thing where you were camping your way through Alaska, but the idea was to make it as comfortable as possible so people would really enjoy it. And this was before we had cabins and all that, but the camping was aided by the guides who tried to do most of the work and set up the tents so that people just enjoy life, and the food was all prepared for them. So it was adventure with a shower. In fact, every third day you got to take a shower on this trip, and 2/3 of the way in Denali, we had cabins where you could have a roof over your head and linens. And it really was soft adventure. It was adventure travel, which is so popular today, which eventually became ecotourism, because we realized that this is a really wonderful way to do these kinds of trips without having too much impact on the environment. Interacting with the environment, small groups, is also gentle on the environment, and it can be done in small scale. So that formula, adventure with comfort, really became the foundation for what we do. And I want to tell you about a little bit of how we expanded, but you let me know when it's time to do that.
Yeah, I definitely want you to get into that. But I'm still slightly fascinated by this tent trip capacity here. Was anyone else doing that kind of activity at the time, or did you originate this concept for us here in Alaska?
There was no operation, no commercial operation on the Kenai River for rafting at that time. I was the first person to start that, and another friend of mine was the first guy up in Denali, as it comes out. We're both former rangers, and for state parks, and so we had this connection, and we evolved into taking people up there and doing his trip as well as the ones we were doing on the Kenai. But I, being a big fishing person, and loving fishing, I also started branching out to go out into the Bristol Bay fishery and do remote trips, fly out trips, and we were flying out of the Kenai area and flying through the passes over into Lake Clark and over to Chillicothe, over to the Mulchatna, and then eventually over up to over in King Salmon. So fishing, and then we're really doing well in the fishing on the Kenai. So it became an really important part of our sport fishing, and still is. And I'm so thrilled that I'm still part. Get a chance to hang out with Dave and talk to even that young guys like him even talk to me at my age is a gift. So we have a lot of fun. And he has to listen to my stories when I come up, but he's very polite. So I get a big kick out of it. He gets a big, at least he pretends as if he gets a big kick out of it. So
I don't know, Bill. I think most Alaska fishing guides have heard a story or two from an old timer. That's their specialty. So I love this. Yes, before we talk about the evolution, I still want to get a little bit more lowdown on the community of Cooper Landing back in the day. So it wasn't necessarily open arms out of the gate, but then they were like, okay, they bring some good. They're saving lives, contributing to the community. Yeah. They know what they're doing. They're not going to put us out. So so when did it become a lodge? And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself and we should let Kirk talk about expansion.
Well, Kirk, you go ahead.
Well, the one thing I just want to say was that that first camping trip was so successful, and I led that for 4 years. Jim and I led it for 1 year. And then Jim was one of these unique people that live and breathe fishing. I don't necessarily live and breathe fishing. So he helped work with Bill on the strategy, and he helped kind of carry forward the initial Kenai River sport fishing program. Because I was preoccupied running these trips and organizing trips. But in 1985, that trip filled up, and we had a waiting list. And we had a chance in 1986 to actually run 2 trips, which was kind of good for me because then I could become a manager because I couldn't run both trips. And then we could double our income. And I'm thinking, great, we're going to have these 2 camping trips. Won't this be great? And Bill said, oh, no, one trip's going to be the tent camping and the other trip's going to be cabins. We're going to start building these cabins around our little deck. We had a little deck, which was the first site was a campsite, right? And so he said, we're going to start building cabins around this deck, and we'll have one trip go camping down the river and then go to Denali, and the other will start and all 5 nights while they're on the Kenai is going to be in these cabins. We'll do day trips and then go north and stay in cabins on the way to Denali. And I just thought this was a really dumb idea because camping was what I loved. Being outdoors in the tent, you can hear the wind, you can hear the birds. You're sitting around the campfire after dinner. The moose walks down the shore, the midnight sun. You're around the campfire. You're swatting mosquitoes. I mean, it's just glorious, right? Well, Bill presented this vision. Oh, we're going to have cabins. We'll eventually have a lodge. We'll have a bathhouse, and we just thought that was so fun to create this village. We all got on board. And the next year, when we started both trips, the cabin safari filled out first because we stumbled on, and maybe Bill knew this all the time, was what people really wanted.
Right.
Adventure by day, comfort by night, a roof over your head, a glass of wine, a great meal. And that's become the formula. Eventually, all the camping faded out, and it became the setting for the fishing program, the setting for all those trips passing through. And then eventually we got involved with other lodges. Now we have 2 other lodges in addition, and the trips going through them. So that was the big moment. Adventure with a shout of roof over your head. We should have just asked my parents because they were older and done with camping, and they knew this already. But anyway, that was the big moment where it became sort of the soft adventure by day, comfort by night. Still small group travel. The experiences we do by day are just the same we did back when we were camping. But we have these comfort, but not too much comfort, because after all, we want them to stay connected to the Alaska wilderness. So
right. So can we talk a little bit about the fishing program from the original days, like that early 80s into late 80s? What kind of trips were you offering? What were you fishing for? Who was guiding all that good stuff?
Well, we developed obviously the coho were important, and I started the idea of actually go over to Prince William Sound, and we bought this 65-foot boat and used it as a mothership, and then we went ahead and started fishing in August uh, in salt chucks over there for silvers, and that
Yeah.
way you could uh, maximize the season. You'd start off with reds, and of course back then we had a lot of kings in the lower river too, so we were doing all that. And then, uh, but by the time the fishing program uh, by that time, the fishing program became um, multifaceted. And we even went down to Seward and went out and did halibut and such like that. So we started to basically just with a raft going down the Kenai River and evolved in all these multi fishing activities from Prince William Sound to Resurrection Bay, and of course the Kenai in Upper River and even and the Lower River too. So
Yeah.
we had a lot going on. There were different types of boats too. Of course, on the Lower River, we had wonderful power boats that were capable of catching those kings when they were in the heyday. It was a wonderful experience, but that's certainly gone away. And
Yeah.
now we were just very very the rainbows and catching rainbow trout in a drift boat is probably I would, and Dave's the guy to really tone in on this currently, but it's all evolved pretty much to that type of fishery. And as far as our activity is concerned with our company, and we I think it's, of course, that's always been my favorite. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you can't beat a rainbow trout on a fly rod. Period. As far as I'm concerned.
Hard to argue with that, Bill. Um, yeah, so Dave, like Bill was talking about that it was the Wild West there with the motorized upper and
Mhm.
people going back and forth, and then the popularity of sportsmen's because of the ferry and access point there. That's not really changed. But
Yeah.
it's been my opinion that like pressure, like that there's more interest in trout fishing now than previously. I don't know if that's because there's more interest in fishing or there's just diversification of interests, but I think of it a little bit zoo-like now. Do you think it was busier back then or today as far as number of people out there?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And, I started working for Alaska Wildland in 2014 and guiding in 15. So, I have a sort of, I would consider it to be a kind of a narrow window of what people have experienced guiding and fishing this river since, the late 70s or early 80s. I've been fortunate enough to share the guide shack with a few guides at our company who were guiding then, in the early 90s or even late 80s, and hear a lot of stories from them about, how things used to be, and even with other guides that I work alongside on the river now. And I think that yeah, busy then, busy now. The use pattern has shifted a little bit. There's less boat-based fishing like king fishing on the lower river, and has
Hmm.
transitioned over to a lot of shore fishing, bank anglers targeting sockeye. I think certain sections of river have seen a major increase in use, fishing rainbows and dollies. That area below Skilak and that western end of the refuge comes to mind. I think, people tell these fabled stories, whether they're kind of, misremembering or not, but going down there and hardly running into any boats and catching rainbows on this section of Middle Kenai like it was the world's greatest secret, and the secret's out, right? It's not a secret anymore. It's an amazing fishery. But yeah, I think the use has shifted a little bit. I think that there are fewer registered guide services up and down the Kenai River now than there were, say, 10, 15 years ago, arguably, somewhat similar amounts. But I think that there's, yeah, a different kind of use. And I think through the advent of certain things like the the Kenai River Guide Academy and some more, ethos throughout that whole community of river users, it's kind of changed and in a way become, a little less cavalier, a little less colorful characters, to borrow one of Bill's terms, and kind of we're all a little more on the same page with what we want the river to look like, and what we expect out of each other when we're there. And so, that's a helpful component too when you step out to the boat ramp every day.
There might be one or two colorful cats still around.
For sure, yeah.
Okay, so that is interesting. You talked about the ethos. And so I just, let's talk about sort of that mentality change and shift over the years. But what was just to paint the picture, Bill, we touched on the fishing activity that took place when you originated the business. You were Lower River Kings, Res Bay Silvers, Upper River Silvers, or yeah, just Kenai Silvers in general, Upper River Rainbows. All of that took place. What was the most popular activity? What were people coming up here for? What were they jazzed about?
There was people really interested, and always has been, at getting the reds and being able to take them home. Wonderful, just amazing Alaskan fish, and of course, thankfully, we have a lot of them, and so
Yeah.
that's kind of what we like to do. It's like, and always have, like, you can not you feel good about sending people home with some wonderful salmon, but you can also go out there and use a fly rod for the rainbows and catch and release. So you get a chance to get some actual fish flesh, and
Yeah.
also some wonderful fly fishing for rainbows. So that's pretty much how it was even back then. But they definitely wanted to take home fish.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. And comparatively now, do guests still want to take home fish? I know we're going to talk about that sockeye run from this year.
Mhm. Right, right. Yeah, I think that's definitely still a part of the game. There's a lot of folks who, even if it's not taking one home, that's kind of a bucket list item they want to check is, well, I'm coming to Alaska, I want to catch a salmon. And sockeye being a pretty widely available species, and with 2 runs of them on the Kenai, the opportunities are plenty to get people out and at least catch one or catch a few. And yeah, a lot of folks do want to take some fish home. And right, like we've mentioned with some of the runs that we've had, the number of fish coming in, and like Bill said, you can still feel good about harvesting those fish. There's fish
Hmm.
available there to take for harvest and send folks home with. Um, and a lot of people do want to just go fishing. It doesn't really matter what it's for. A lot of people do want to target, rainbow trout and dolly varden. They want to fly fish, or learn or improve their skills. And so I think a lot of our trips end up being a combination of both. Some days where we're salmon fishing, some days where we're exclusively trout fishing. But some of the really fun times in the year, that first run in June, we can be on the upper river and the drift only. We can swing for some sockeye in the morning and then float downriver away from the crowds and away from sportsmen and down towards the lake, and really deliver this peaceful experience, which is great, as a guide too, to push downriver and get in a quiet spot and anchor off and have a lunch and make a few casts. And then, yeah, boat a few rainbows, and it's really an amazing trip. So I think that, yeah, not some things don't really change. People want to catch some salmon, bring some fish home, but they also want to see some of the pretty rainbows and dollies that we have.
Yeah, I love your perspective of trying to give them the most abundant fish that we do have, which are the sockeye, which is great. Love
Exactly.
that. So, did we catch sockeye the same way back then that we do now?
I would
Has it
say,
always been a flossing
yeah,
thing?
um, pretty
Pretty
much
much.
streamers, and tried to. Well, it's very subtle. Back then, when I first was there, you'd go by and see these guys. There was big treble hooks, and trying to, and nobody there to uh,
Yeah.
make sure that they weren't doing that. But Dave's really perfected how to catch these reds. You go out on the river and you're going to come home when those reds are in the river. You're going to come home with salmon, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Anything?
just hearing stories from some of our older guides that used to work here. Not much has changed with the sockeye swing. I know one of our old guides used to talk about using sink tip lines or sink tips in lieu of the half or 3/4 ounce lead to sort of swing that streamer through. That evolution kind of happened where switched to the big chunk of lead halfway through the leader. And I like to use the term force feeding sometimes is a more gentle way to describe. But even that,
Yeah.
that fishery is changing on the Kenai some too. Now people are catching them in different ways, and so yeah,
Yeah.
the sport continues, evolution continues.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that. I know that my my brother had a really fun time filming underwater takes of sockeye taking jigs on the Togiak. So
Hmm.
pretty cool thing to see.
Yeah, yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, I'd like to hear more about what next techniques are on the Kenai.
Yeah,
Be interesting.
I think more and more over the last few years, and this past year, 2025 being no exception. Yeah, you see a lot more boats that are pulling plugs for sockeye at the outlet of Ski Lac in different sections of that middle river close to where Ski Lac Lake dumps out. Um, yeah, kind of getting this predatory instinctual bite. I think the jury's still out on why I think that is a successful way to target them, or why you do get a bite doing that. There's some pretty specific locations or lures, or the density of fish there. The reason I say the jury's still out on why, I think it could have a lot to do with what are those fish doing there. I think there's a lot of transient fish that are pushing through into the lake or the upper river, but I think there's also a lot of fish that are going to spawn there, and there's a high density of them, and so they get a little bitey around their
Mm-hmm.
reds, or where they're going to dig. We see that happen even on the upper. If you're pulling plugs for trout, you start getting sockeye and these aggressive bucks that want to bite, and it's like, oh, that's kind of weird, but it's starting to work in more and more places. People are figuring out the right plugs and the right spots and times of year to do it. So yeah, very, very effective. We still generally stick to the riverbanks and swing for sockeye. I think for the guest, it's a little more interactive to have them on the gravel bar with the fly rod in their hands and swinging and fighting these
Yeah.
fish on weight, standing in the current. I think that's a lot of fun for people. So we still stick to that, and the kind of transient fish that are blowing through these different gravel bars. But yeah, in different rivers, there's a lot of different techniques, like you're saying, Marcus, with the marabou jigs and the togiak. I was talking to a guy just yesterday who's thinking about coming back to Alaska to keep guiding, and he was talking about a river he worked in Bristol Bay where they were putting prince nymphs as like a dropper off of a streamer and getting sockeye to bite these little like red, prince nymphs. A different, kind of technique I hadn't heard of. So I think in a lot of these different rivers, there are these kind of specific techniques that people have through trial and error have developed,
Yeah.
just to try to get these dang things to bite.
Or maybe you've caught so many of them the same way. You want to figure something new out.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
that's right. That is true.
Right? I mean, you're still
Yeah,
addicted to the fishing,
yeah,
but it's fun
yeah,
to change it up.
yeah.
So I think I skipped the part where we got to do the whole like how this property was added and how that property was added. Will you want to break in with that part and add some of the stories you've been dying to share?
Well, I would just say that our Kenai Riverside Lodge started out as a cabin. And Bill came to Jim and I guess it was 1985. It says we're going to develop a fishing program on the Kenai. Usually it was like we incorporate fishing into a day trip, or we'd incorporate fishing into our camping trip. But we had some rafting guys that really were pretty good at fishing, and they wanted to be fishing guides. And we knew it was a great resource. We had the permits, and we just needed the facility for it. And so Bill, like he usually do, he would get a bunch of rocks, a bucket of rocks, and he put four down. Well, this is where the cabin's going to be, the dining cabin,
Very
and
sophisticated.
you put some rocks out and say, well, this is where the cabins are going to be. And back then we thought that, well, fishing, guests are going to fish with their buddies. They're all going to come together. We only built two cabins and they were bunk beds in them. We thought they'd all pile in there in bunk beds. And we bought a kit cabin from this company and hoped that was making cabins. And I think there was something wrong with it. We could never, I mean, back in those days, we were bootstrapping and we had to get a deal to do it. And so we got this little cabin and we built it. I think it was like, it had like gray seasoning on it. We had to bring it back to looking like beautiful wood again. And one of Bill's good friends was our builder, Tim, and Tim built this cabin and it wasn't big enough to call a lodge. It was a cabin, maybe it was, I don't know, 15 feet wide and 20 feet long. We built a shanty on the back where the cooking was going to happen, and it was the fish cabin, the fish dining cabin, and that's where they went to fish. And we had two cabins dedicated to fishing program, and then everything took off from there. And once we had a chance to add to our program and add more cabins, we basically tore down one wall of this cabin and put a wing on it. And we stood back and say, hey, that's a lodge. And that's how we started calling it a lodge. And we built another wing on it, and then we tore it on the back and built a big kitchen on the back. And so we didn't think we would eventually have a lodge, but little by little, next thing you know, it is a lodge. So the next thing you know, we have 16 guest cabins now, and half of those cabins are dedicated to our fishing program. Half of those are dedicated to the nature folks that like to come and do the same sort of activities that we did in the camping days, only do it by staying in the cabin. And then sometimes they go to the other lodges, sometimes they go to Denali on our trip. So we're still in a lot of ways doing the same things we started with. We just have a lot more amenities and opportunity these days.
Yeah. So you mentioned that when you first put up those two guest cabins for the fishing program on the Kenai, you did bunk beds and thought everybody would come up buddies, that style. You were not, that's not how it worked?
Well, they did, but we realized they really want their own cabin. And so we
Yeah.
added more because they didn't really want to bunk with their friends like we thought they would.
Right.
And some would, and some today still come up with their buddies. But we
Right.
realized, and this is really just our evolution, is people really kind of want their own place or double occupancy. And so now our cabins are more spacious. They've got a couple beds. They've got the amenities. And and this took us a while to figure out too. But they want bathrooms in their cabin. In those
Yeah.
early years, we had a
Yeah,
central
they do.
bathhouse, and that was fine until it wasn't. And then now we and all of our lodges now have bathrooms, built on the cabins, and people have those amenities, but not too much because we still want them to really enjoy the rustic nature of where they're staying, or still feel like the context of wild Alaska, the authenticity, and then to go out and enjoy the day and come back and have comfort at night. So that's still part of it.
I've been very fortunate to have spent the night in in those cabins, two of them at separate times, and they are the perfect size for what you need. And nobody wants to be indoors anyway. But having the bathroom attached, that's a
Mhm.
necessity.
Yeah.
So excellent. So yeah. So tell us about, well, so the fishing program has been the foundations out of the get-go. Yeah, along with the rafting, but the Kenai property has been the foundation. What percentage of people want to like that do come up to that property go do the full Alaska tour? Like, are they getting the full Alaska picture when they work with you guys usually?
Well, when you look at our overall business, it's really a number business together. The rafting,
Yeah.
fishing is only about 20% of what we do. The lodges, the Kenai Riverside Lodge is the only one that has fishing based from there. And I believe one of the really benefits of our fishing program, it's a limitation, but it's a really benefit too, is it can only grow so big because of the restrictions on the Kenai River and the permitting. And so you can't be a great big fishing company because there's only so many permits allocated. And so you're always and you're always providing a small group, intimate, highly skilled fishing experience, and people are willing to pay the price to get that kind of experience. And so it hasn't really grown that much over all these years. There in peak season, we find a few more cabins to keep people comfortable. It's also difficult to find and hire guides that come back year after year, and so that keeps us kind of small too. But I think it's a benefit because it's a very special program. We could dedicate half our lodge to this. And one thing we found anytime the economy dips a little bit, the fisher people come back every year.
Mm,
They're and this year again, I mean, some of our other programs were down because of the financial uncertainty that we experienced this year with people that weren't sure where they were going to spend their money and hold it back a little bit, but not the fishing guests. They came back strong. In fact, we grew a little bit. And so that's an important part of our business mix. And we love that we get return guests. I would say what, about 60% of our guests, Dave, come back year after year after year, which is a wonderful thing.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. A lot of folks who, whether it's every year or every other year, we had an inquiry this morning. I responded to somebody who was last year, a group of four gentlemen in 2014, and they had been some previous years before that, and so they want to come back and do a trip again this September. So, and it's not uncommon
Yeah.
for those kind of folks to come out of the woodwork as well, who haven't been here for years, and then they say, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, we want to go back to Alaska. We want to go with Alaska Wildland."
That's great. I love that. And it is interesting how anglers as tourists are and their ties to Alaska and how it really gets into their soul deeply and they want to come back and experience more. And I don't know, and you travel industry experts will share with me. But I don't know, like if somebody's coming up to see Denali and they want to go to Seward and do, you know, a glacier tour or whatever it is, out of Whittier. Is this a once in a lifetime trip, right? Versus the repeat guest. So on the opposite side of the tour side of your business, do you get repeat clientele? Is that a minimal number comparatively?
Well, I would say that we always considered Alaska except for the fishing guests, Alaska was sort of a once in a lifetime place.
Yeah.
But our destination has matured. We never thought people would come up here for only 5 days or a week, but now they're doing that.
Yeah.
And they discover Alaska and they come back and do another trip. We have people who will do our non-fishing trips and they'll love it so much they bring not only their family, their extended family, and they charter a whole
Yeah.
trip to do it. So there's a lot of that. We don't get 60% return like we do on the fishing program.
Sure.
But Alaska's matured as a destination and people will come back again and again. The other thing that we found is that fishing is an iconic experience that people want to do. And they may not want to do it for a whole week like most of the people that Dave interacts with, but they want to do it for 1 or 2 days in our vacation. So more and
Right.
more we're people that adding a day or two of fishing. And now Dave and team know how to do this seamlessly, where they can add this before and after their trip. And we also have fishing guests who will spend 4 or 5 days at Kenai Riverside Lodge, and then they'll go out to the Kenai Fjords at the Kenai Fjords Glacier Lodge and do nothing
Yes.
but enjoy the wilderness out there. Um, we have a name for that, those kind of people. What is that, Dave? It's a popular part of what we do now.
Yeah, yeah, the Fish and Fjords Explorer. It's It was, I think, a few years ago. We did some work with our websites. We merged Kenai Riverside Fishing and Alaska Wildland were, I think, two different sites for a long time. And when those came together, people started to really connect the dots between the two and say, well, wait a minute,
I
we
see.
can come here and fish, and then we can do that. And you're going to get us, you know, to and back to Anchorage, and it's just
It's
all one
easy. Yeah.
turnkey trip. And yeah, we saw it so many times. I was like, wow, this is like, let's just put a name on it, put it on a website, make it easy for people to find. And that's become a really popular one. And like Kirk said, I think there's more and more folks now who want to add on 1 or 2 days of fishing. They want to just like participate in that experience as a part of the larger itinerary. More groups of people who, maybe there's 2 or 3 in the group that want to fish, and the other folks aren't as interested. They want to raft or go hiking or do a tour in the fjords. And so a lot more of our itineraries and the guests that we see now are doing things like that as well. They're kind of or different activities within the same group too.
Well, isn't it funny how the ones that don't think they want to fish end up fishing and love it, and they end up catching the most and biggest fish too a lot of the
It's
time?
kind of uncanny how that works sometimes.
That's how we rope you in.
I have to tell you, we're sitting here looking out. We're in the San Juan
I'm going to turn the
Valley. We got two bald eagles. They're
and a harrier.
in a northern harrier now, right in front of our window here, just going
Oh.
after our ducks. We have
Oh.
we have ponds and things in front. It's like a wildlife show here. It's hard for me to concentrate.
Concentrate on you.
Well, that does sound more interesting than us, but
No.
oh boy. Let's talk about Cooper Landing and the evolution over the years to what it is today. Because we have a 3 bears, Batman.
I gotta tell you, back when Cooper Landing, it was a kind of no holds barred kind of place. But the irony is that we were talking, and the state was talking at that time about they're going to bring the road around and up on the mountain up to the ridge in what is now being built. But that same conversation was happening about 50 years ago, and it still isn't done. I mean, did you know that? I mean, when we first heard about it, we go, well, that's going to be neat, because then Cooper Landing become this quiet, beautiful little town along the river, and with instead of the trucks, racing through there like they do, it's going to really make a different change onto Cooper Landing, and the road is still. How close is it now, Dave? What's the latest?
For the bypass highway,
Yeah.
I think we're somewhere in the 2030s, 2032 or 3 for an estimated
Oh my
completion.
God.
I think.
Oh, see, I'm
Just
trying to
it.
live long enough to see that, so they
You can do it,
keep
Bill.
pushing it out, making it hard on me.
Just
But
50 more
I agree with you,
years.
Bill. It's going to be a good thing, because the community Cooper Land is going to be less than a drive-through and more of a destination location. It's going to be better for our guests. It'll be a lot more quieter in that valley without all
Right.
those trucks to be up on the
Yeah.
side. And the businesses are they're going to have to adjust and attract people to come to Cooper Landing, and people will, because it's a beautiful place and we've got wonderful things to do there. So I think in the long run, things are going to work well for Cooper Landing. But it's been discovered. I mean, it's a strip of businesses all along when you go through that. And it wasn't that way. In fact, when Bill was involved, and later when I got involved, there were just a couple small businesses in a very quiet community. And I remember in the late 80s, I went to an ecotourism conference in somewhere in the International Ecotourism Conference. And one of the speakers said that what happens is these special experiences start out with small groups and small group experiences, small businesses. And then it takes about 10 years. And next thing you know, it gets discovered by the mass side of tourism, the large scale tourism, the big group tourism. And sure enough, in about 90, Princess Lodge appeared up on the bluff. And we go, oh no, that's the end. But it wasn't the end. I mean, yeah, there were bigger people, but you know what? Those people got off their buses and went in the small boats. And some of us included, got to be some of the favorite things these large scale travel and tourism people did was to get in the small boats and go down the river with us. They really had a great time. So I think in some ways, yes, it's more congested, it's busier, but it does have charm. And there's a sort of a churn in these businesses, because you know what? It's hard to run a seasonal business. I tell our
Yeah.
staff, we make money for 100 days of summer, but we spend it 365, and it's hard to do. So some of that just keeps it kind of right sized. And once the highway goes through and around, I think that's going to prove things. And certainly the river, as Dave and Bill has explained, arguably is a better river than it was 20 years ago, because of the regulations, because of the changes. Yeah, there's still a lot of people fishing it, but the quality of the fishing experience has endured because of the small scale regulations that have come to play there. So yeah, Cooper Landing is a little bit bigger, but you know what? It's a larger community now, and more people live there and make it their home, which makes it a better place to live, a better place to travel, a better place to be in the summer as well.
Do we have a current population number for year-round residents in Cooper Landing? Anybody got a ballpark? We can look that
I'm
up if we
guessing a
don't.
couple hundred still. It's not a lot, but
Yeah, a little north of 300, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
interesting. Do we know how many other businesses are right in town? I mean, you've gotten restaurants have cropped up in the last couple of years, right? Or
Yeah.
at least
Well,
half a dozen years or
they've
so.
always come and gone. We'd have a restaurant, but people, 100 days basically to make it weeds everybody out. It's so difficult. And, the thing about Alaska, I mean, and it's, just Fort Kirk, because he's been at the longest now, but, you're talking, it's not just the 100 days, it's the forest fires, it's the tsunamis, it's the volcanoes going off, it's the economics of the lower 48. It goes, I mean, there's
Yeah,
nothing. I mean, you
never
can't.
dull moment. Yeah.
And Alaska is the quintessential most difficult place on the planet to make a living. It really is, unless have found a gold mine that actually has gold. And, it's just an amazing place, but it gets in you can't help yourself. You think, okay, I can do this. And a lot of people do and don't, they don't succeed. And for us, we've just been very fortunate. But there's been some very trying times with some conditions that you can't even explain to people, because unless you live in Alaska and know all these things, you couldn't possibly understand what can go wrong trying to make a 100-day season work.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know, what was it, 8, 9 years ago, you guys had big fires through there and had to
Yeah.
shut
Oh
it
yeah,
down for
oh yeah,
weeks that were planned ahead. That's crazy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, wow. So, this is totally off subject from where we were, but it just popped into my brain. And we were talking about it earlier, and so I do want to comment. I have had the privilege of staying at your wonderful Kenai Riverside Lodge a couple of times. I've gotten to fish with Dave on the river. He put a fly, he helped my now 11 and a half-year-old daughter fly fish for her first time and catch fish, and has been on the cover of our magazine with my daughter. So that's very special to me.
Oh wow.
But, and I have been so fortunate and grateful to you all, because you have been our supporter and client for 25 years, something in that range. And so same thing. It's hard to make a living in Alaska, but we wouldn't be here without your support and without the support of the people that have, backed us for so long. So we are very grateful for that. One thing I would like to comment is that every interaction I've ever had with anybody from your organization has been top shelf. I've always been so impressed by the quality of people you hire, and how much they really truly seem to love their jobs. And I've been all over Alaska. Don't get me wrong. I don't have the tiny little viewpoint of just your place. I've seen a few outfits at work, and I have been, yeah, completely impressed, Dave included. Just top shelf quality people that you have in there. And I think that is part of what really sets you apart. You have built this business on a few key principles, and I've had an order of which we were going to discuss them, and I've gone way off that. But would you share with me, Kirk, what those foundational business principles are that you guys still operate on today?
Well, care and concern for the environment is one of our fundamental principles, and actually that's in our DNA. I mean, I grew up in the '60s and '70s environmental era, and I always loved being outdoors and wanted to be outdoors and learned about being outdoors, and trying to apply those principles to business was a bit challenging for me because of course I went to college in the '70s, and There was a lot of, environmental degradation going on. It was environmental crisis years. And I really thought that, business owners made their money by overcharging their customers and oppressing their staff. And, profit was evil to me. And so once I got involved with business, it really helped. First of all, Bill was a good role model, and he could talk about this, his idea of conscientious capitalism, where you got a heart, and you're really trying to do the right thing to your employees, to the environment, to the community you live in. And we've proven that it's a good way to run a business. But really, we did it because it made us feel better, and that counts too. But you really can run a business that way. You can run a very good business that way, and everything kind of just grew out from there. And so all those principles are still with us today. If anything, we try to do them even better. And one of those is treating your staff really, really well, because we all learned what it was like when you work for somebody else. We know what a good boss was, what
Yeah.
a not good boss was. And the other thing about Bill and I, we both grew up in the summer camp business, and a lot of ways, I think this is the camp counselor approach to management, where you get to know your staff, and you get to know their strengths, and where they can use help, and you let them develop, and you turn them loose, and you feel responsible for them. And sometimes you have to let them go, and that's unfortunate, but you really want them to succeed and give more responsibility. And you know what? They do love their job. They do love their work, and they come back year after year, and they're dedicated. And that's the secret potion, is
Yeah.
having employees that love what they do and appreciate the leadership you provide, and the opportunities you provide. And we would never have survived through all those things that Bill talked about if it wasn't for a group of staff that were dedicated and helped us get through those challenges. And that's proved itself challenge after challenge, year after year. And I think we're going to keep doing it that way.
Yeah. Well, amen to that. Yeah, Amy's phenomenal, Dave, all of the people I've ever interacted with, down to the seasonal ones that are just here for the summer, like they're pretty psyched to be here. It's great. You guys are great ambassadors for Alaska that way. Okay,
Yeah,
and
I would
let's
say
talk.
this. It used to be Bill, it used to be Jim, it used to be Kirk, but now it's Dave and Amy and Jeff. And I mean, everybody's got this culture now. We just kind of nudge it along.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
we,
that's a good point to make, that there it's just replicating what you all started on. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Kirk, Jim, and I think without knowing exactly when it happened, but we pretty much coined the word, the words responsible capitalism, because you can make money, you can have profit, you can have the best staff, and you can do it all. You don't have to make something worse because you're trying to make money. You can turn the whole thing into responsible capitalism, where your staff and everything that you're doing on the rivers or any place is doesn't degrade, but enhances. And we get a chance to educate. We get a chance to people leave our place knowing more, and knowing more about the environment than when they arrive. And they're ambassadors for a better environment.
I love that. Can you, Dave, maybe tell me some of those components that are part of the Kenai Riverside Lodge that um, represent that um, conservation side of things? What do you guys do there that stands out for that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Listening to them talk about responsible capitalism, being really intentional about what you're doing with your business and where your business are going. Kirk mentioned this before. We're sort of at a point with our fishing program now where it doesn't really make sense to grow too much more and add a bunch more boats and more guides and more guided anglers on the river. We're in a position that we like, where we can fill out our schedule and run high quality trips, and high quality being the key phrase there. So being intentional about our use on the river in the first place, and where are we going to put people, and how can we have sort of the lowest impact possible, and spread ourselves out so that we're not a a big imposing feature when we're out on the river. I think that's a big part of it. There's a lot of different ways. You got to just kind of comb through everything in your operations to look for those little opportunities to reduce what you're using, reuse things, really make your gear last, buy good products from good companies. Something that comes to mind thinking about that is a simple thing like fly lines. A lot of manufacturers for a long time, you'd buy these spools and a fly line 100 feet wound up on a plastic one-time use throwaway spool. And one year, I think it was Scientific Anglers, they started making them on a cardboard, recyclable spool. Now I don't have to throw away, 20, 25 of these single-use plastic spools every year. So, boom, now we're going to start buying more of these SA lines where there's just less packaging involved, and take our old trout lines and cycle those down into becoming the sockeye lines to just extend their use. And so those being just, one or two examples of trying to comb through the end tackle, the hard tackle that we use, as well as all the other, gear types to see where we can reduce what we have to use and buy every year. Yeah.
I think that's smart. I love that. I don't know what it is. Maybe I just hang out with fishermen, but it seems like fishermen are the most conservation minded. Oh, maybe the hunters too, but they're the most conservation minded people, and they think about single use plastic and things of that nature. I love it so hard. So great.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
do you want to add anything to that? Anyone?
Oh, no, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, then let's wrap on a couple of different notes here, because I've had you guys on here for your whole day. Let's talk about 2025 season and what the highlights were there. And then I'm going to segue into giving us what if somebody wants to come up and do a trip with you guys, give me a sample itinerary to come down to the lodge. So let's start with 2025 season highlights and tell me how was fishing on the river this summer?
2025 highlight reel. I think a few things come to mind. It's hard to ignore the crazy late run sockeye that we had. I mean, it was all
Record.
time to see that many fish. It's cool to be out on the river and just see everybody, running a boat up from Bings into the middle, and there's just people catching fish everywhere, and it's all smiles. And so that was really cool to see. We had a lot of happy guests. We definitely put our walk-in freezer there at the Riverside Lodge property to the test. We did a lot of filleting, backpacking, deep freeze this summer, and sent a lot of sockeye home with our clients. I think the staff, that's been a theme that's come up multiple times here. That's a highlight for me most seasons, and this previous one being no exception. A bunch of guides that have been with us for a handful of years now that returned, so it's always good to get the team back together. All of the the rest of the lodge staff at Kenai Riverside Lodge, we have a pretty good retention rate year over year with our staff. So having people come back in that know what we need to do, what needs to get each season, it's really cool to go down there and work with that team. So the staff's definitely a highlight. And I think, with the fires we had in 2019 and a couple years where we're dealing with the challenges of operating during COVID and floods and, different weather events over the last handful of years, this one seemed a little more normal. The weather was pretty good. The water level was nice. It was never too high. So it was like you're kind of waiting for that other foot to drop all season, and it never really did. It was a good one right down to the end.
Too good to be true, down to the 4 million sockeye.
Yeah. The one challenge that did pose, I think, was just a really incredible amount of biomass in the upper, between the eggs and the salmon carcasses, which was cool to see, but it definitely, made for some unique trout fishing conditions. You found them in some weird places in September, the late season, that presented some challenges and some learning opportunities too, where you had to kind of get creative. But yeah, tremendous amount of food in that river that'll be good fodder for the trout this winter and next spring.
I wonder if we'll see those kind of numbers again here. Probably
Yeah.
not quite, but even then, it's still going to be massive. And now you've got better tricks in your arsenal for trout because they presented that had to think about it moment.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Well,
Before you give me an itinerary, actually, so 2025 season highlights. Was there a new addition to the family of properties there in 2025? Did that take place?
well, I will mention this that, as you know, Kenai Riverside Lodge is our oldest lodge, our original lodge. And so we both begun a multi-year program to revitalize everything. In fact, all of our, half of our cabins, the ones we use for the fishing program, all have brand new oversized porches on them so people can relax and enjoy after their day. So they have a good new look and feel. And we revitalized the lodge itself, renovated the lounge area. And so, you know, you have to innovate all the time. You have to make changes.
Yeah.
And so we love it when our guests come back and say, "Oh, look what's new and different." The other thing that is not necessarily new for 2025, but is new for the last few years, is that we're able to acquire the 5 acres just upstream from our property.
Okay.
And the previous owner had built 3 beautiful homes on this property, and it's 5 acres. And he called me up in 2019 and said, I'm ready to sell this. And I think Alaska Wildland Adventures, you've got such a great story. You've done such a great job of developing your programs and caring for your places. We think you should have this. And so they offered us a price that we could actually afford. We went to our bank and they said, yeah, let's do it. And so now the 3.5 acres, which traditionally used to hold our Kenai Riverside Lodge and all the cabins, has now been expanded almost 10 acres. And we are now in a master planning project on how we're going to spread out what we do on 3.5 acres now over 10. But the benefit is that we immediately get a chance to use these homes. And 2 of them are 3-bedroom, timber frame, gorgeous homes. And the other one's a 2-bedroom home. And so now we can have our fishing guests will come back and say, well, we want to do something different. Well, how about stay in one of these homes? And so they'll bring their families or their fishing entourage and they'll stay in these 3-bedroom homes and just have a whole different experience while having meals in the lodge and doing the fishing experience. So that's a wonderful thing for our fishing guests. The other thing is that we're eventually going to be able to, when you have 3.5 acres and everything's crowded there, sometimes some of the behind the scene things happen, not behind the scenes. Well, now we're going to put some of those on another corner of the new property. And so we'll be able to spread out a lot of what we do. So you're never done. You're never done. In fact, over the next probably 4 to 5 years, we'll have even a big, not necessarily bigger, but a better and more polished physical environment where all these wonderful things can take place.
I do look forward to covering that story.
Well, you should come and stay in one of these beautiful cabins. We got your name on one of them. We're going to get you in there, you and your family or whoever.
You say that.
And we'd
You
love to
say
do that.
when. I would love
Yeah.
to. I accept
fun to do.
anytime for sure. So, Dave, if people want to come up and go fishing with you guys, check out your places. I mean, I highly recommend it. Can you give maybe a sample itinerary that folks could expect to experience?
Yeah, definitely. I can take a stab at that. I think when folks call and they want to know about our properties and what they want to do, some of the first questions we ask are, when do you want to come? Is there anything on your bucket list that is kind of a must do while you're here? How many people are you traveling with? And that really gives us a sense of, okay, where might be a good fit between our 3 lodge properties and our range of activities for a trip for you to do while you're on the peninsula. And I think something like a trip that combines, let's say, you could do all 3 lodges in about 7 days, 6 nights, or a 3 lodge combination trip, and you can throw in an upgraded day of fishing in there. So starts and ends in Anchorage, and we'll bring you down to our Kenai Riverside Lodge for that first night. Kind of check in, get a tour of the property, take a sauna, jump in the river. Day 2, what's usually a rafting trip down the Upper Kenai to our Kenai Backcountry Lodge there on the south side of Ski Lac Lake. You can also upgrade to a day of fishing instead. And so we'll go from Sportsman's or maybe from our lodge and fish our way down the Upper Kenai. Then you get 2 nights in the middle of the National Wildlife Refuge. Beautiful, beautiful spot. And then after that, you can come out, uh, cross over to Ski Lac back to the roadside, and we'll take you to our Kenai Fjords Glacier Lodge. So you get to go to another boat-in only property out there in the Kenai Fjords, see tidewater glaciers, chances to see whales, orcas, different marine wildlife, and paddle around in a very secluded and beautiful environment. Again, with some beautiful cabins that have bathrooms in them, uh, and then take a nice boat ride back to Seward, and then hop on the train and cap it off with the train ride back to Anchorage. So I think
Okay.
that's one of the more comprehensive looks at what we do and
That's
our lodges, and seeing how our staff can kind of work the magic in those trips and get a taste of a little of everything on the Kenai Peninsula.
Yeah, it's essentially a taste of everything. If I wasn't so fishing obsessed, that would be perfect. 'Cause that trip to the to the Glacier Lodge sounds amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the beautiful thing about it too. We have these predetermined guided adventures throughout the summer, so you can sign up for one of these tours with a specific itinerary. But a lot of guests come and we kind of put together an itinerary based on what they want to do and how
Yeah.
long they want to stay. So you want to come fish for 4 or 5 days and then go to the Kenai Backcountry Lodge for 2 nights. We can probably put that together too.
And you've got some add-on excursions too, and you're partnering with other tour companies so that you can give them a full Alaska flavor taste. Yes?
Yeah, definitely. Um, with some of those guided adventures, they go up north towards Denali National Park and overnight in Talkeetna.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll add on bear viewing trips across Cook Inlet for folks, something they do more or less on their own before or after their trip with us. But not uncommon for us to add on something like that.
Yeah,
And the
partnerships.
other thing I think we find ourselves doing a lot is people have things on their list that's not necessarily something that we do or operate, and we're never afraid to point them in the direction of other tour operators and vendors in South Central or around the state that we think would be a
Yeah.
good fit for them, just to make sure that those folks who are traveling up here land in the right hands.
Yeah, that's great. So you're probably a good place to start since you'll kind of filter out the opportunities for them with your basic questionnaire and then send them on the right path, most likely with you, but possibly not. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a good way
smart.
to put it.
It's good. Yeah.
And if they want to go fishing for a week, we can offer them diversity within that fishing experience. Dave, tell us a little bit about how we can make a week very diverse in terms of what their fishing experience is.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's different things to catch and different ways to catch them all throughout the summer, but between the Upper Kenai and the National Wildlife Refuge, we have got 4 drift boats that we run up there. We have power boats where we still go down to the middle and lower, chasing sockeye and silvers, and we also work with a few reputable partners out of the Seward Harbor that pursue king and silver salmon as well as halibut. And so, on a 4 or 5 day fishing package, you could be catching rainbows on the upper one day. The next day, you could be out fishing for halibut out of Seward. You could go, down to the lower and catch some silver salmon or sockeye on the middle. And then, come back to the upper river for another private float down the canyon. So I think each part of the season has its own unique attributes, but that's the beauty of it, is there is quite a bit of variety between those different fisheries, and we're able to accommodate a lot of it on the Kenai, and then along with a couple of those partners that we have out of Seward Harbor.
Do folks generally have an idea of when they want to come, or do they choose it based on what is available? And maybe you want to run down by month, sort of what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Some folks contact us since they've got a date range in mind, time that they have available in the summer, and they're kind of confined to a certain couple week period. And some people are pretty open ended, but we'll try to push people into the appropriate time of year based on what they want to do. So if they want to catch salmon and a lot of sockeye, we explain to them, well, you can come during the first run and, around the middle of June, or the late run in late July, or into early August. And some folks want to, focus on silver salmon, particularly, and not sockeye salmon. And so we'll, try to direct those folks towards later in the summer. And I think for the most part, people who are coming for fishing packages have that flexibility where, they're going to take the time off work and spend the money and put their plans together, to come up here, and they want to make sure that they do it at the right time. It's going to be a good trip for them. And so they're willing to be
Yeah.
flexible to come at different times of year.
Okay.
To kind of walk through, each part of the season, I think June June offers a lot of great trips, in my opinion. Again, that upper river fishing in the drift only. You have opportunities to catch salmon and catch and release fishing for trout and dollies. You kind of see the whole peninsula come to life. Everything's leafing out. There's still snow hanging in all the mountains. You get down to the mouth of the upper river in Ski-Lac, and there's Arctic terns diving on salmon smolt. It's just a really beautiful time. And then, we transition into mostly trout fishing there in the first 2 weeks of July, since we're in between the salmon runs. It changes a little bit on the upper river. There's more insect life going on, and streamer fishing, and a variety of ways to catch trout. And so that can be a really fun time of year. Then in late July and early August is really when we turn the corner towards the main sockeye season. So a lot of time spent down below Ski-Lac Lake, fishing sockeye in the middle, always peppering in those upper river trips when we can, to show people that beautiful piece of water up there, which is actually very quiet, compared to other places on the Kenai in late July.
That
So
time,
it's really
that time of
serene.
year.
Yeah. And then in August, once we kind of rack the sockeye rods for the season, we turn back towards trout and start waiting for, the kings to start dropping eggs up and down the river to set off that egg bite, the bead bite, and waiting for some silvers to show up, where we can go down and fish the tides on the lower Kenai one day, and then fish trout and dollies on the upper the next. And all the while throughout the season, there's these opportunities to go saltwater fishing out of Seward, which those are really incredible trips. I've gotten to go along on a handful of those over the years. And man, yeah, going out in the Kenai fjords and being able to catch salmon while you're watching whales, bubble feeding, or seeing stellar sea lions and a wide variety of sea ducks and other birds. And then you get to bring home some fish at the end of the day on top of it. It's just, those are really cool trips.
Well, one thing that hasn't changed from then and now is your obvious love for what you do, gentlemen. I can see the big smile on Kirk's face. He loves talking about Alaska. It makes me so happy. I still enjoy it myself 25 years later after starting this magazine. So I feel that. I feel it completely. Who wants to share a favorite fishing story with me from over the years? Maybe one from back in the day. Favorite time on the Kenai? Anyone got one canned?
Go ahead, Dave.
I can go first. Maybe this will,
Loosen 'em up.
spur some memories for you. When one that comes to mind for me was just a couple of years ago. There was a good sockeye run, so there were a lot of eggs in the water, and not unlike this last fall, it was, they weren't everywhere, right? You had to go kind of figure out where the trout were. And I was with a guest of ours who's been coming up and fishing with us for the last probably 5 or 6 years now. I fish with him every fall, and we went down the canyon, myself and him and his wife, and we found a little gravel bar that was just, covered up with trout. You'd step out there to fish, and you were just, blowing fish off the gravel bar. They were everywhere. I was like, oh my gosh, thank God we found them. We found a good spot. And we proceeded to fish that gravel bar down in the canyon for the next 3 days. And 2 of which we didn't see another boat come down the canyon all day long. We'd launch out of Jim's at 7 a.m. and push our way down, fish a few holes along the way. And we just got to have this incredible and private experience with this little corner of the river all to ourselves. And I remember that the last day that we did that, we slid into this small eddy above the gravel bar, and we were fishing for silvers, and they released a few, um, and we were still kind of fishing, and a brown bear comes out of the trees just on the other side of this big eddy, and dives through some bushes and trees and starts swimming around right there. My client had to strip his fly out of the way because this bear was just like swimming right through his line almost. So then we backed off. We got to watch this bear, swim around for a little while, pushed down to our little gravel bar and caught a bunch of fish from a safe distance where we could watch this bear fishing over here, and all the while not another boat, the whole day, and then floated out onto a glass, super calm Ski Lake and motored over to the upper Ski boat ramp. And yeah, that one will stick in my mind, I think, for a while, because it was just the conditions all lined up just perfectly for a couple really good days of fishing.
So I've got one. This one happened in 2021, and as you know, every year we're fortunate to get Bill up here. Part of that is to look at the properties, look at the lodge, meet our uh, our fishing guides and the rest of our staff, and tell some stories. But other part is for Bill and I just to go out and have a great time and talk about the business and talk about opportunities and ideas, which is a really important part of my year. Well, 2021, we didn't think Bill was going to be able to come up. He had some health issues he's working through, but things came together, and sure enough, he came up. And we're up here with Bill, and Bill said, "You think I can go fishing?" And I said, "Well, let me check with Dave." So I checked with Dave. I said, "Dave, Bill wants to go fishing. Can we get him out fishing?" And Dave said, "You know what? I've got a spot in the boat tomorrow. I got a boat, a whole boat. Let's go. The three of us. We're going to go fishing." And we did. And that was a highlight after all these years, just sitting there on a boat with Dave and Bill and watching Bill fish and Dave getting us onto the fish and having conversations about the old times, about the new times. And it was a beautiful day, and it was clear and sunny and warm, and the mountains were out, and the fish were biting, and that was a good day on the river with Bill and Dave.
Love it.
That was a fun river day. That's for sure.
Yeah, that was a good day.
Yeah. I could go on and talk about, um, it's hard to remember that long ago when I was down there, doing so many wonderful new things. And one of the things that comes to mind is that when we didn't have fishermen or raft or things were slow, uh, whoever was working for us, including me, we would go out on the water so that we could catch our own fish, because we would utilize them for food because of trying to keep the cost down of buying food. And so it was, think about what it's so exciting the thought of every day was dependent on the river, even when you weren't making real money from clients, but trying to supplement your food. And that's how it was in the early times. I mean, it was just that's what you would do. We'd climb up on the mountain and set up these water pipes that came down off of these creeks off the mountains, so that we'd have showers. I mean, we did. That we took care of so many different kind of subsistence things when you were building the business, and there wasn't a lot of other distractions. You're just trying to come up with a way to survive, and those are great memories, because you're with they weren't staff, they become your friends, we just had an event a couple of days ago where a friend of a person who worked for me and worked with Kirk ran into him here in Anacortes, just out of the blue. But we've got these people that we know and have been with us for, we got hundreds of those people, and people that got married because of the businesses we've run. The people that are just, now I have another friend that I just ran into and said, it changed his life. You hear that, how important the business has been to a lot of people over the years. And it is just an amazing, in my case, an amazing life that I've been able to live. And I'm so grateful.